podium? No. I can say Peter, I don't know about the last name. Okay.
San Diego.
George, the recipient of the George Washington Memorial Award is chosen for his contribution in presiding the virtues, the character, and vision of George Washington. It is my honor and a distinct pleasure to present the 2012 George Washington Memorial Award to you for your many years of educating, presenting, and promoting George Washington to your students and to the public, and for your excellent book, Realistic Visionary: A Portrait of George Washington. Please accept this award and the accompanying honorarium with our heartfelt thanks and appreciation for all that you have done and continue to do to honor the memory and legacy of George Washington. Brother Peter.
Well, I can't tell you how happy I am to be the recipient of such a prestigious award. And the pleasure is enhanced by having my lovely wife Marlene, now married over 50 years, to be with me today. And it's even nicer to have my four sons and their lovely spouses to join in the festivities. So it makes it a very special occasion for me. I know a few of you were at the symposium earlier today. There I was described as the senior scholar, and now that it's been over 8 years since I retired from George Mason, the word senior is taking on more and more meaning with the passage of time. The years are going by too quickly, and you begin to wonder a little bit about old age and slowing down. I know I was recently worried about my wife Marlene losing her hearing, and I decided to check with the doctor and see what he might recommend. He said the best thing to do is go home when she doesn't see you, come up behind her, ask her a question. And if she doesn't respond, get closer and see what happens. So when I came home, I found Marlene cooking dinner in the kitchen, and I said, "What's for dinner?" And she made no response. So I walked up quite a bit closer, said, "What's for dinner?" Still no response. Then I went up right behind her and said, "What's for dinner?" She abruptly turned around and said, for the third time, "It's chicken." I'm personally convinced from my study of George Washington that story would have brought a smile to him. Washington was by no means the ponderous, dull, and humorless man that he sometimes portrayed to be. He loved to dance, charmed women, enjoyed good conversation over long, leisurely dinners with members of his military staff and family members. He went to horse races, boat races, and barbecues. He danced at balls and attended the theater. He played at cards, billiards, and backgammon. He hunted and fished, and he served his friends with affection and generosity. In 1786, he wrote one of his good friends, "I commend you for passing the time in as merry a manner as you possibly could. It is assuredly better to go laughing than crying through the rough journey of life." I like that last part. It's assuredly better to go laughing than crying through the rough journey of life. James Madison noted this overlooked aspect of Washington. He said, "The story so often repeated of Washington never laughing is wholly untrue. No man seemed to enjoy gay conversation more, though he took little part in it himself. He was particularly pleased with the jokes, good humor, and hilarity of his companions, end quote. Now, Washington lacked Lincoln or Reagan's ability as a raconteur, but he was not lacking in a sense of humor. I imagine, for example, that most of you would not expect the following letter to be written by George Washington, but it was. He had a rather earthy sense of humor. Learning about the marriage of one of his officers after the war was over, he wrote these words: "I'm glad to hear that my old acquaintance, Colonel Ward, is yet under the influence of the vigorous passions. I will not ascribe the intrepidity of his late enterprise to a mere flash of desire, because in his military career he would have learned how to distinguish between false alarms and serious movements. Charity therefore induces me to suppose that, like a prudent general, he had reviewed his strength, his arms, and his ammunition before he got involved in an action. But if these have been neglected, and he has been precipitated into the measure, let me advise him to make his first onset upon his fair lady with vigor, that the impression may be deep, if it cannot be lasting or frequently renewed." Now, while it's important to remember that Washington had what I call a soft side, that's not why we honor him today. We honor him as the absolutely essential man in the creation of our great nation. There were two distinct creative moments in the American story: the winning of independence and the creation of nationhood. And George Washington was the absolutely central figure in both creations. Without his great skill as a unifier, without his charisma and national vision, the United States of America would not exist as a single independent nation today. It's a record of achievement without parallel in our history. And there's no doubt in my mind that George Washington deserves to be ranked number one among all presidents. That includes the great Abraham Lincoln. Now, as I was contemplating what to say this evening, I gave thought as what is it about George Washington that I most admire? There's certainly a great many things, because by almost any standard, he's one of the most remarkable men that ever lived. And I know my own life has been greatly enriched by the opportunity to study his. But I decided among the many traits, there were four that were particularly meaningful to me. One was his courage. If there's one thing upon this earth that mankind love and admire, it is a brave man. And George Washington was the bravest of the brave. There's actually a current move led by John White to have Congress award Washington the Medal of Honor posthumously for bravery, and I personally hope it comes to pass. His legendary courage as the commander-in-chief was really without pair. He is a frontline general in the real meaning of the word. One of my favorite quotes about the way Washington would face adversity is this: "I hope I shall always possess a sufficient degree of fortitude to bear without murmuring any stroke which may happen to me." A second quality that I greatly admire is his determination. He showed remarkable persistence in pursuit of his goals, regardless of the adversity he faced. This is a tremendous trait, one we need today. Washington had a patience in suffering, as one person put it, that gives him an infinite advantage over other men. The third quality is his judgment. Of course, Washington made errors in judgment, like anyone would. But taken as a whole, a significant reason for his remarkable success was that he was a remarkably astute judge of both men and events. Think of the opportunities he opened up for relatively unknown people, like Henry Knox, Nathaniel Greene, Alexander Hamilton, and a host of others. Washington may not have been a brilliant man, but but he was a remarkably wise man who got things right. My friend Joe Ellis put it this way about Washington's presidency. Washington's core quality was judgment, the ability to make sober and highly realistic assessments of the strategic options facing the infant American Republic, and to get the major decisions right every single time. One of the reasons it's hard for us to appreciate the depth of George Washington's intellect is that what he said seems, in hindsight, to be obvious. But to identify while deep in the trenches of conflict what the future would consider obvious is a towering intellectual achievement. Finally, the fourth aspect that most impresses me is his integrity. He was fundamentally an honest and honorable man. He seems the exception to the rule that power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely. How many of us could write near the end of his life as he did? I do not recollect that in the course of my life I ever forfeited my word or broke a promise made to anyone. In the year of his death, he wrote his good friend Brian Lord Fairfax, where Washington declared he had always walked on a straight line and endeavored, as far as human frailties and perhaps strong passions would enable him, and Washington had strong passions, to discharge the relative duties to his maker and his fellow men without seeking any indirect or left-handed attempts to acquire popularity. Washington wants to enter the Temple of Fame, but only through the doors of the Temple of Virtue. I just finished a fine book on the assassination of James Garfield by Constance Millard, The Destiny of the Republic. She includes this quote from Garfield: "There is nothing in all the earth that you and I can do for the dead. They are past our praise and they are past our help. They do not need us, but forever and forevermore we need them. Forever and forevermore we need George Washington. Like a star that might be long dead, and yet we see its light. George Washington's example of a life lived with honor, courage, and service, and with a touch of humor as well, can still greatly inspire. For me to be honored by a group like the Freemasons of the United States for my efforts in trying to share George Washington with a wider audience is extremely gratifying. I thank you very much for this honor."